2-1. Folks, I'm furious about this NICA Act. This law to put new sanctions on Nicaragua is just completely wrong. And I think most people in the USA don't know anything about it. If they did, they would be opposed to it. I want to tell you why I'm opposed to this NICA Act. All right, so Nicaragua. For many years, Nicaragua was a brutal military dictatorship funded by the United States. They had a dictator, Somoza, backed up by the USA. He was killing people, slaughtering people. Then in 1979, they had a revolution, a democratic revolution against a dictator. And they had a socialist government, the Sandinistas, that came into power. And so in the 1980s, the USA started sending all kinds of weapons into Nicaragua and funding these people called the Contras. And these were terrorists, people with guns and weapons that were going through Nicaragua, burning schools, destroying hospitals, murdering people. I mean, the Contras in Nicaragua were not a nice group of folks by any means. Now, in the 1980s, when this was happening, it was also been revealed that these Contras, who were backed up by the United States in Nicaragua, trying to violently overthrow the government, that they were actually involved in the drug trade. That a lot of the cocaine that was coming into the U.S. was coming from these Contras, from these terrorists the USA was funding in Nicaragua to violently attack the government and kill people and burn hospitals and schools. They were also shipping in drugs to the United States. So this was a disastrous policy. Throughout the 80s, tens of thousands of people died in a civil war in which the USA was funding extremists and terrorists to topple the government of Nicaragua. And then in 1992, Nicaragua had an election. And you know what? The Sandinistas, the political party that had taken power after the toppling of the dictator, they lost. And they stepped down. And a pro-U.S. political faction took office. And they peacefully stepped down, they had an election, and they lost. And then after a decade, the people of Nicaragua said, you know what? We're going to give these Sandinistas, these socialist revolutionaries who brought down the dictator, we're going to give them another chance. And they democratically got elected once again. And since then, Daniel Ortega, who was the leader of the Sandinistas, who was a key guerrilla fighter in bringing down the dictator Somoza, he's been president, and he's been doing a lot of really good things. He's been drastically fixing up their economy. Right now, their GDP is rapidly growing. If you look at it, you know, they talk about in the last 10 years in Nicaragua, the GDP having gone up by like 36%. Poverty has been drastically reduced. And right now, there's a lot of economic construction going on. And at this point, Nicaragua is in the process of actually building a canal. And this canal would challenge the Panama Canal. We know Central America, you have your Panama Canal. They want to build a canal through Nicaragua, which would actually challenge the kind of the maritime dominance that the United States has in the ocean and the shipping trade. So in alliance with China, Nicaragua is building this huge construction project. People all over Nicaragua are being employed. Nicaragua is moving ahead. The living standards, the life expectancy is rising. They're providing health care to people. Cuban doctors have been shipped into the country to give free health care to people. Nicaragua's government, the Sandinista government, which is the elected government of Nicaragua, is doing a lot of really good things for people. Now, the slogan of the government of Nicaragua is Christianity, Socialism, and Solidarity. And they have their own brand. They're not like Marxist-Leninists, like Soviet-style communists. They have their own brand of teaching, rooted in the traditions of Latin America, rooted in Christianity and the teachings of Jesus Christ, as well as in Marxism and communism. I know that they've studied Mao, they've studied the Bolivarian. They consider themselves to be part of the Bolivarian movement in Venezuela and elsewhere. They've been vastly improving people's lives. So now the U.S. Congress is going to put sanctions on Nicaragua to try and hurt their economy. This is unacceptable. We should be doing business with the people of Nicaragua. China is there doing business with them. We ought to be doing business with them too. I, as an American, do not approve of this NICA Act. We shouldn't be putting sanctions on Nicaragua. This is a mess. You know, whenever some country around the world wants to be independent and they want to build up their economy and start developing, that's when the USA comes in and tries to tear them down. And it's not about democracy. For years, we backed Somoza. The USA backed Somoza, the brutal dictator of Nicaragua. And now we're trying to topple the elected government. This is economic warfare against the elected government of Nicaragua that is vastly improving people's lives according to all studies. You know, the World Happiness Index, that's a study done by the UN, not a communist front group. The United Nations says that of all the countries in the world, the country that had the greatest increase in happiness, according to the United Nations World Happiness Index, was Nicaragua. People's lives are improving. They're building construction, they're building infrastructure in the country. The lives of people in Nicaragua are getting better, and they're building a socialist, centrally planned economy. They're working with China, they're building this new canal, and so now the lawmakers, they don't say, that's great, wow, let's do business with them, let's trade with them, let's work with them. No, they're trying to crush Nicaragua with this NICA Act. It's completely unacceptable, and I think if Americans really knew what was happening, they would oppose it. I think we ought to have some of the ideas and policies they're implementing in Nicaragua here in the USA. All over the USA, our bridges are crumbling. Our hospitals are closing. Schools are closing. We ought to have a government here that prioritizes infrastructure and raising the standard of living. You know, the government of Nicaragua, it's a centrally planned economy. They control the major commanding heights, but they're actually helping a lot of Nicaraguans to open small businesses. That's one thing that they're doing. They think, okay, in addition to building up kind of the centers of the economy that kind of direct things for being state-controlled, let's help people in Nicaragua start their own businesses. They're studying Deng Xiaoping and what he did for China, and they're really doing amazing things. And for the USA to be trying to crush the people of Nicaragua as they try to raise themselves out of poverty with a democratic government is just completely unacceptable. We've got to oppose this NICA Act. It is not acceptable. The US Congress should not even be considering this act, let alone passing it, and we should all be opposing it. I am against the NICA Act, and you should be as well.